mainly I just think about the people, right? It's like there's just people out there that need answers. They need something that works to help themselves or their families. And the main exposure that we get is, we go on Google or we go on social media, or we even have like these people that we trust that, we get our information from. And we all have our biases. It's just part of being human, right? That's why we talk about our biases in the show. But I would like to show people that there is more maybe than meets the eye in what they see like on an Instagram reel, or what their favorite influencer tells them.
Hey, this is Ari. Welcome to the Energy Blueprint podcast. With me today is my good friend, Victoria LaFont, who is somebody I work with personally. And for the purposes of this podcast, what you need to know about her is she is the co-host of the podcast Influenced to Death. And that is the subject of what we're going to be talking about in actually this two-part podcast episode. We ended up talking for about, I think, close to 3 hours in total, and we decided to just make it into 2 episodes because we had so much to talk about. So a little bit about Victoria. She is, as I said, the co-host of the podcast Influenced to Death, which is, in her words, your guide to navigating the wild world of wellness influencing. She's also the owner of the LaFont Agency, whose mission is to improve integrative medicine with marketing, and she serves on the teaching staff of the University of Western States Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine program. So as I said, I know Victoria very well. I've worked with her very closely for, I believe, maybe a couple years now. And we've become friends. We've had lots of conversations personally about this world of, as she calls it, the wild world of wellness influencing, more broadly, apart from our work together and related to our work together, of course, because even though I hate this term, influencer, I guess you could conceptualize me as a health influencer. I prefer the term teacher personally, but anyway, the point is that she is full of very insightful ideas and perspectives on this whole topic. I think, as you'll hear from her personal story and why she ended up starting this podcast, there's a background to the subject, and I think the background, the critical thing to understand here, as you are probably already aware of, at least to some extent, is this world of health and wellness and online influencers and social media and all this stuff that's going on in recent years is just full of questionable information, inaccurate information, downright bad and dangerous information. And some of that is coming from people who are maybe well-meaning, but just don't have the proper level of knowledge or expertise or scientific literacy to deliver good information. Other aspects of it may be coming from really shady people with maybe intentions to, people who are knowingly misleading their audiences because of financial incentives, right? But at the end of the day, what we're left with, as in terms of what the general public is left with, and the average person, is they're left to navigate this very complex information landscape full of lots of competing and contradictory claims about, what diet is best for you, or how to lose fat, or how to gain muscle, or how to detox your body, or any number of other health topics. There's so much information out there with so much complexity and so much contradiction between differing claims from differing experts, that at the end of the day, it's very tough to figure out what's true and what's not, to discern good information from bad. And that is a big part of why Victoria ended up starting this podcast, Influenced to Death. It's to talk about, potentially dangerous information that might influence people, in some cases, literally to death, more commonly influence them to do things that may harm them in some capacity. And she brings a lot of insight into this very important area. And, they touch on very controversial topics, the carnivore diet, the keto diet. They have a podcast on the medical media, maybe two podcasts on that subject, things like detoxification and seed oils, lots of different contentious topics where we have all these different competing claims about what's true. And they're really trying to navigate, and arrive at what is true on these topics in a very thoughtful way, in a very critical, in a way that it involves a lot of critical thinking, but is simultaneously very open-minded, is simultaneously trying to bring awareness to their own biases and being upfront about saying, well, here's where our personal biases are. Here's what we think is likely to be true about this topic. But let's explore it with an open mind, with experts. Let's go find experts with, in some cases, differing opinions to us, and let them make the best case to convince us why we're wrong, right? Or, it doesn't always play out in that exact dynamic, but the basic idea is exploring contentious, controversial, complex health topics to try to arrive at greater levels of clarity and truth about what is really going on. What does the science really tell us in that area? And I think this is an invaluable service. And I think that it's also important to help clean up the ethics and transparency of this whole space of health and wellness influencing. So I thought, I personally listen to her podcast, and I recommend that all of you do the same. And I thought, what better way to kind of bring attention to this and support it than actually have Victoria on my show to talk about it. So this is a very meta thing. We're going to be on a podcast talking about another podcast in this case, but also getting into really what you're going to hear us talk about a lot in both of these episodes is all of the different sort of psychological dynamics that are at play, both at the level of influencers and the financial incentives to mislead in some cases that are at play among influencers, and the psychological dynamics, cognitive biases at play in the general public. And, sort of like both levels of what's happening, why people may deliver bad information, well-meaning or not so well-meaning, and how people get suckered in by bad information and what are the consequences of that. So I think there's a lot of really cool, really interesting, really important stuff to know on all aspects of what's going on here. And I think that you'll probably find this podcast, both of these podcast episodes, to be very insightful in that regard. So with no further ado, here is Victoria LaFont, the co-host of Influenced to Death. Victoria, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So we've had a lot of conversations in recent years working together, but this is a first. This is a first of us having a conversation publicly about your podcast. We've talked a bit about what you're doing just in our own friendly communication as in our personal relationship. But now I'm featuring you on the podcast to talk about the work that you're doing. And what you're doing with your podcast is very interesting and very novel and very fun and just a very cool concept. So let me have you tell our audience why you started this podcast, Influenced to Death, and what it's all about.
Awesome. Yeah. So again, thank you so much for having me. It's exciting for me to talk to you about it and kind of spread the word about it. So yeah, myself and Hannah Wright, we are the hosts of Influence to Death. And yeah, we started this podcast. This has kind of been a brainworm for me for the past 15 years. And really the goal of the podcast is to shine a really balanced light on what's happening in our world, RNI's world and integrative medicine. Maybe in conventional medicine a little bit, but it's just not my shtick. Like my people are the functional people. So I kind of try to stay in that world. So when we pick out topics, they're usually topics that are, more holistic in nature. And really, it came from my background growing up, the like health problems that I had myself, and then becoming a professional in this world and just seeing like there's a lot of bias that is in integrative health, and we want to talk about that. So that's where Influence to Death came from. We try to infuse it with a little bit of comedy, which is even in the name. It's a little bit tongue in cheek, right? We're speaking to influencers, not all influencers, but some of them. And actually, the fact that like some people have truly been influenced to death.
Yeah.
And that's not to take the focus off of the fact that like we are autonomous. You know, we have responsibility for our own choices, but I think that we can all see, or I've experienced this, we're pretty desperate for answers. I mean, that's one of the big like pros of functional medicine is that we help people explore. For instance, you know, the like meme that comes up most of the time is like somebody goes to the doctor and they're like, you know, just dying in front of the doctor and they're like, your lab tests look totally normal. You know, it's like, okay, well, hang on a second. Something isn't right. Um,
Hmm.
so we try to consider both sides. And we're doing it in a way where it's not like drudgery. That's not my personality. That's Hannah's a lot more like thoughtful, and I don't want to say introverted, but like considerate compared to me. But my personality is fairly gregarious and I enjoy laughing and comedy and like that. But from like an entertainment standpoint, it seems smart to infuse this subject matter with more than just like, here are the facts, here's, you know, the research and like that. It's like we want to bring a little bit of levity to this topic because it can get kind of dark.
Hmm. Okay, so what would you conceptualize as the goal of Influence to Death? Like what is why is this work important? What are you trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah, so I'm also thinking like maybe could I like just tell a little bit of my background and
Please, yeah, yeah.
yeah, what kind of got me here. So was sick kid, like the story that so many people have in this world, couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was vegan, tried, you know, all the different diets,
Oh, I remember you
everything.
telling me about the stint in Hawaii as well. I'm sure you get there.
Yeah. Yeah, I lived in Eugene, Oregon first, switched to like very hardcore vegan diet, got worse and worse and worse, went to Hawaii, dropped out of college, hitchhiked around Hawaii, tried to figure it out, ended up living at this raw food community on Big Island called Pangaea. My guess is even like knowing the people who listen to your podcast, like somebody out there might be like, Pangaea, because it was an ecotourism spot. A lot of people came to Big Island and stayed with us there, but we ate the primal diet. So it's a completely raw diet that includes animal foods. Um, Pretty trippy. And it was the first time in my life that I was like, I think I feel like other people feel now. Like, you can feel this good, you know, and looking back, I'm like, okay, I was getting major doses of sun every day. We worked out on the land every day. There was no gluten in that diet. And I happened to be celiac. You know, that took me
Wow.
years and years to figure out. But so, of course, you know, it's like there's all these different factors. Um, but it was really the first time that I felt like, okay, like my body, maybe my body works. I'm not just going to be stuck in here for the rest of my life. Um, and then from there, moved to Northern California and actually got a nutrition certificate. So started seeing clients in Northern California. But during this whole time, like developed more symptoms. So I still wasn't just right. And I think, you know, like kind of the big symptom that I dealt with was rosacea, really extremely severe rosacea. Like the videos you see and you're like, oh, it was painful. It looked painful. It was embarrassing. I mean, we usually don't think about quality of life as like the first, you know, like issue that comes up when people are sick, but it's like hard to have this thing on your face.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually the first thing I thought of because I had acne when I was a teenager and I remember just having no self-confidence and just
Yeah.
like looking at girls that I was attracted to, but like, oh, there's no way I'm ever going to go talk to her because I just have all this stuff all over my face that is horrifying, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's really impactful for people. So,
Hmm.
you know, what ended up happening is like, okay, I'm like a nutrition professional and I have this like horrible like peelings. I remember like contacting Doctor's Data, which is, this like testing lab. And I was like, can I mail you the skin that comes off my face and you like
Wow.
analyze it to tell me what's going on? I had seen so many people had never gotten a diagnosis. And I think kind of like what has influenced me in this direction, with Hannah to do this podcast is I saw all of these integrative clinicians. I spent so much money. I swallowed so many pills. Like looking back, I'm like, I was on supplement regimens that were bananas. Ate really restrictive diets. Like I remember I was on AIP, but like AIP with no tropical foods because maybe there was some issue with tropical foods. Like in hindsight, I'm like, oh my
For
God.
people listening, AIP is autoimmune paleo.
Yeah, like an autoimmune protocol, very restrictive. Got treated for quote unquote issues that came up on a gut test that were not actually a problem.
Hmm.
So went through all of this work and there was very little change in my face, right? There was like no effect. And it kind of made me think like, okay, I'm glad that there is this alternative route that people can take, but even it's failing me. Like I don't have an answer that
Hmm.
has become clear here. And then in the midst of that, working in this little town in Northern California, I'm this new kind of kid on the block and I'm, putting myself out there everywhere. And it just so happened that this town was a gold mining town. And so all of the tailings piles are there, people are exposed to this. And there's this like massively high rate of breast cancer in this,
What do you
this little
call them?
town.
Tailings piles?
Yeah, from the gold mining.
Uh-huh.
So they would use mercury and tungsten, and I want to say like arsenic to mine that gold. And
What,
then
they
it
use
was,
those metals to help strip out other compounds to isolate the
I
gold?
think, I think so. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's like I think it kind of would like bind it, and then they could get the gold more easily.
Oh, wow.
And there's these huge like they're called the diggins in this
Hmm.
area. It's like these huge places where they use hydraulic mining equipment. So they basically like use water just to like blast away the dirt, and then they would get the gold out of there. And so there's these enormous craters people go
Hmm.
hiking in now. But
And
by the way,
presumably the stuff gets into the groundwater in those areas?
in the dust and like
Mm,
it's everywhere. I was
yeah.
actually part of a study in that area trying to look at the connection between metal exposure and breast cancer.
Hmm.
So it's like prevalent. And so all these women come to see me for breast cancer, and I'm like, really have no business, like working with these women. But I could see like they aren't getting as much help as they would like, right, from their doctors. They're eaten up with this disease. I'm trying my best. And then there's some people who are telling these women, like, oh, yeah, I can absolutely like basically heal you from cancer. And I was like, hang on, it's just like too much. Like, this
Hmm.
just isn't true. Um, so I started to get kind of influenced where I was like, oh my God, like, where do we go if conventional isn't helping us and integrative isn't getting the job done? Like, well, what else is there? Um, and at that time, I just had this side project from my practice as a nutritionist. I started a protein powder business. So we're like Laverne and Shirley. My business partner and I are like in, that like hair nuts in a commercial kitchen, like mixing the protein powder ourselves. And it just happened that that business did well and we sold it. So I had
Hmm.
this money and I went to graduate school. Um, and that's where I was like, okay, maybe this is an answer for me because there is a way to approach health science that isn't just kind of like I think people had good intentions, let me say that, but looking back, like, kind of like slapshot or conventional, like, there's this other way where we can follow, like, really good clinicians and the experiences that they've had and research, and that just was not my experience up until that point. So, going through grad school, like, okay, right, it's rosacea, there's research that, helps to resolve that, and I'm super lucky that, I sold the protein powder business and went to grad school and like had this experience where I had amazing, you know, symptom resolving with the rosacea. And then just started to see like okay, like we really have to do our due diligence when we're working with people and putting information out there. Um, and it kind of led to the work that I do now, and particularly this podcast. So the way that we have designed Influence to Death is we examine a topic in each episode. So like we've looked at like soy, right? That's a huge controversial. It's like one of the
Hmm.
most controversial topics. Or we've looked at like the carnivore diet, and we give the backstory of that topic, so the history, and then we look at our own biases. So, I mean, I can see for myself there are some topics where I'm like, I absolutely have a pro bias, and then I go look at the research literature, and I'm like, it's not so great. Like, I think I'm wrong,
Hmm.
or conversely, I have a negative bias. And then I look at the research literature, I look at the fact that it's helped lots and lots of people. And I'm like, I've got to consider this. So we're very upfront in every episode, like, here's what we think. Then we go through the research literature and then we give people a takeaway. So we do our best to make every episode kind of follow that template so people can see, like, okay, there's not just one story on this topic, the popular narrative or what people have seen in marketing, or on social media. There's like a very complex story that accompanies most of these kind of like hot topics.
Hmm. Excellent. So the goal of this ultimately with each episode of Influence to Death, and why you think that this is important for the broader natural health functional medicine community, is to help balance out um, biased information or cherry picked or distorted information. Is that how you would conceptualize it, or explain that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to a degree. I think that that's important, but I like my history with like being a clinician and being a patient and like that, mainly I just think about the like people, right? It's like there's just people out there that need answers. They need something that works to help themselves or their families. And the main exposure that we get is, we go on Google or we go on social media, or we even have like these people that we trust that, we get our information from. And we all have our biases. It's just part of being human, right? That's why we talk about our biases in the show. But I would like to show people that like there is more maybe than meets the eye in what they see like on an Instagram reel, or what their favorite influencer tells them. So hopefully they're getting their information from someplace that's really accurate. The person's done their due diligence. They're presenting both sides. But more and more we see that people kind of just pick one side. Their followers like believe that, they follow it. If they're not getting results, they need to follow it harder. It's like just recently we had an episode, on this foundation, and it's like the guidelines of the foundation are, God's true law, and if you don't have good results, you just have to, go harder with those guidelines.
Wait, sorry,
um
what the thing is called? The foundation?
oh, it's no, it's the Weston A. Price Foundation was the
Oh,
episode
okay.
that, yeah, we
Okay, got it.
did. But and there's wonderful things that that foundation has done,
Uh-huh.
but then we look at some of what's happened, and people again have spent probably millions of dollars, and some people have had really negative outcomes. And it's like, well, because there's more to the story for almost every part of health sciences than what people are told.
Hmm.
From a business perspective, I kind of get it. It's like put your stake in the ground, give people your stance, you get a crowd behind you, you get, your like audience. And then if you change your mind, it's like, well, are you an expert? Are you not an expert? It's like it's very easy, I think, to like have it go in that way and be
Yeah.
successful. But the reality is so much more complex. We kind of say this often, Hannah and I, to each other, like we can't memify medicine. It
Hmm.
just doesn't work that way. Um, so yeah, I think for me, and I would say, I don't want to speak for Hannah, but likely her too, our main goal is to just like, again, make people laugh. We try not to get too dark. We like keep it light. I share my crazy stories from, we're going to do an episode on leeches in February. That's going to be a wild one. I have personal experience with leech therapy.
Oh,
Um,
gee.
but also like to give them information that hopefully will help their lives and help them think like, okay, maybe like I don't have to avoid gluten at all costs. It's like, it's okay to eat this. So maybe like just to lighten the load a little bit and give people a different perspective.
Yeah. So this is a very sort of meta question. Um, and it's a big one. So, and I know there's lots of nuances and complexities here, but I'm just curious to get your take, like to think about the psychological dynamics at play that even make such a podcast like yours necessary in the world. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are the psychological dynamics at play that lead to influencers dishing out often such distorted, misrepresented, cherry picked, bad, inaccurate information that ultimately leads people in a bad direction? And what are the psychological dynamics at play among consumers in the general population that make them susceptible to these kinds of phenomena, or the extreme of which that make them susceptible to, let's say the charismatic cult leader type of influencer who's got some very extreme approach to something, let's just say diet, because that's the most common one.
Mm-hmm.
And why it is so common over, throughout history, throughout, let's say, recent history in the last century in particular, for this thing to emerge again and again, which is some person comes out and says, I've found the one true diet, the one, the best fat loss diet, or the ancestral diet. This is the way that humans ate throughout all of history, and this is the one right way to eat. And you need to get rid of all these foods and only eat these foods, right? And we've
Mm-hmm.
seen just endless permutations of that and iterations of that sort of phenomenon. And to the
Mm-hmm.
extent someone is a particularly like charismatic leader, and often to the extent that they don't ground things in nuance and complexity and present the opposing evidence and counter arguments to their perspectives, but to the extent that they actively distort and cherry pick and present
Mm-hmm.
this very extreme narrative, they tend to attract a very strong following of devout followers who swear by these methods and think they've found the genius influencer and the one
Mm-hmm.
true right way to eat and to live.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. I have an answer for that, and I'm actually curious what you think
Mm-hmm.
also about this. But then there's like a connected idea that I've thought about a lot lately. So to answer the main question, I think it's evolutionary biology. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we need bias. It saved us. It's the reason that we're here and that our ancestors survived. I truly believe that to be the case. And that's actually, to me, one of the most fascinating fields of study is kind of like the way that our behaviors and mind and behaviors evolved over, millennia, like since we've been human and maybe even before. We had to stay with the pack. It was not good to separate from the pack. We needed kind of this like heuristic, this like template for seeing the world. Our brains are designed in that way. Um, Actually, the first time I read about this was in Michael Pollan's book, I think How to Change Your Mind,
Mm-hmm.
where he talks about when people take psychedelics, it actually decreases the activity of the default mode network.
Mm-hmm.
And we can like see all these possibilities. But if we were like that all the time, we would use up so much calories
Mm-hmm.
that we would like kill ourselves
Mm-hmm.
essentially, and he's like, it's very fascinating because kids have very low activity in their default mode network all the time. It's like everything is new, but eventually I think around puberty our brain changes a little bit, and then we have this kind of set way that we see the world, and we have to have that to conserve enough calories to get through our day. So we do have to have that way of seeing things. And like I said, I don't think it's malicious. I have to kind of also believe that in order not to go insane. Like, I want to come toward this topic with a lot of charity, because if I did believe that people were malicious and how, they marketed or picked this stance and, you know, every other, input source of information be damned, like this has to be the way that it is, I would go crazy myself.
Well,
So
I don't want to lead you off track, but just to briefly comment on that, I think it is a good assumption to be charitable and generous in the assumptions you make about what's going on in a person's psychology and their intentions in that way. However, I have witnessed several very clear examples of people who are very knowingly distorting
yeah,
the evidence and distorting their arguments and deliberately ignoring and leaving out all of the information that goes against their narratives to present an afactual narrative or a distorted narrative to make money. There's a
yeah,
strong
ugh,
financial incentive to do that based on this dynamic that I was describing earlier. um, to be the guy who or the girl who presents the next big one, the next big diet fad that goes viral. Like if
mm-hmm,
you are that person, you stand to make a lot of money, and therefore there's a financial incentive to be that person, not and to not present a very complex, nuanced, picture
yeah,
of, well, this evidence says this, and this study showed this, and but these other studies showed this, this, and this, which countered those studies, and therefore,
right.
we need further research to make a strong conclusion about XYZ topic. No, it's like, no, this is the magical diet, and if you just do this diet, you're gonna have endless energy. Your brain, your performance is gonna be off the charts. You're gonna, like, physically, mentally, you're gonna lose fat without even trying. Right? Like you present that kind of narrative. This is how our ancestors ate. Like this is the one true human diet. Right? To the extent that you present those kind of distorted narratives, you
You make
potentially
money.
can get that virality aspect, and certain people know this and do this intentionally.
Yeah, it breaks my heart. Honestly, it's like if I'm able to like drop into how it makes me feel, I just think about all of the clients that I saw over the years and I'm like, that hurts people.
Mhm.
It just makes me so sad to think that. But when people aren't intentionally doing that, and I believe you. I mean, I'm sure you have seen that, and it is
I've
a
seen
great
some
marketing.
pretty extreme intellectual dishonesty. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. I mean, it'll make money, but
yeah,
I do think it truly kills people. I mean, we
yeah.
have evidence of that with certain influencers.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, people who are trying to to do their best and it's not malicious. I think it probably is based in just this like very primal brain that we
Hmm.
have. The good news is we have like a frontal cortex. Like we can step out of that. And I think Ari, it's one of the reasons that I like working with you so much. It's like we can see ourselves a little bit. Maybe not in every moment, but I also think there's a way that I have faith in human beings. I'm like, I do believe that even though we're like short on time and, you know, like the eggs we buy are $9 a dozen or, whatever like the obstacles are, I do think we have the ability to step outside of ourselves and make choices based on balanced information. We try to make the podcast fun and anecdotal and like that to make it a little easier. It's like a spoonful of sugar. Totally cool with doing that, and it's fun for us too. But I believe that the tide is turning in that way. And I think it's one of the reasons why it's like people who are starting to present a more complex picture are gaining in popularity. And I want to
Hmm.
see that grow more and more. The reality is like I don't have to be the person who does that. Like, yes, I love this field and like I love the podcast and I want to keep doing it and like that. But I'm like, anybody, take this idea, run with it, tell your audience about it, let them in on the fact that there are actionable steps you can take from a balanced viewpoint. Or like, I think it was David Perlmutter a couple years ago, I saw on his Facebook page, he was like, hey, I just want everybody to know, I used to say like you shouldn't eat honey because of the effects that it has on brain function, but I think I was wrong. And I like went nuts in the comments and I was like, thank you so much. Like this is such a big thing. Like it's to me is the trust factor in any person who has an audience, is for them to say like, for better or worse, I think I was wrong. that's huge. And I think that that is gaining in popularity. Like, I think people are starting to be like, we can see behind the curtain of
Yeah.
this. So, yeah.
Yes.
And then the adjacent point that I think is really interesting to this, Ari, and this might be a little too far off track, but it's something I've been thinking about. So I'm just going to put it out there. I have such a love of like examining bias and like looking at these different sides and trying to find, okay, like what would be the most appropriate path for a person, or what is the full story. But the more I like play around with this topic, I actually wonder if that is what's best for most people. Like when we look at studies and we see that people who have like a faith community have better outcomes, or we see when people really believe in something, whether the mechanism is effectual or not, they have better outcomes. I'm kind of like, who am I to like burst somebody's bubble? Like, there is a way where when we just believe really deeply in something and we don't examine the bias and we like don't think about it too much, sometimes it works really well. So I've actually been questioning my own methods of like pointing out bias and like looking at the research in all these different ways to be like, I don't know if that's what's best for people. I mean, we're going to keep doing the podcast. It's fun. I do think that it serves, but I will say, like, after grad school, there are things that I used to believe in that were really effective for me. And once I understood, like, there was nothing really to back that up, it lost its effectiveness. Like, I've had that conversation with Tim Sharp before where I'm like, my
Hmm.
placebo got stolen from me
Hmm.
in grad school. And he's like, yeah, that absolutely happens. Like, it's a phenomenon. So,
I
um,
would be interested to have Tim on here. Timothy Sharp is somebody I've had on the podcast before, actually talking about the subject of cognitive biases for
yeah,
people that are listening. And Tim is a mutual friend of both Victoria's and mine, and just an overall very smart guy, very interesting guy to have these kinds of conversations with. Um, my personal opinion on what you were just describing, I think it's a really interesting topic to consider, um, and it's something I've given quite a bit of thought to as well. It's something that also sometimes springs up in personal relationships I have with friends, and sometimes I encounter friends who have certain belief systems about certain things that I see as what's to say this in a very non-judgmental way, but like things that are just maladaptive or not serving them or not based in good logic or evidence.
mm-hmm.
And I always, when I'm having these conversations with them, I kind of go through this mental calculus of like, okay, well, how much would I be serving them by helping them think through these belief systems and maybe temporarily sort of rupturing some of these ideas that they have and beliefs that they hold?
Yeah.
And how much would that benefit them in the long run to actually destroy or disrupt some of those belief structures to help them ultimately form new ones that are maybe closer to what you could call truth, or something that's something that's more logical or more grounded in evidence. Um, and to what extent would that actually be harming them? Like they have this particular belief system which they're very attached to, that gives them some degree of maybe psychological comfort in hard
Yeah.
times, or they feel very personally identified with. It's a big part of their who they perceive themselves to be, and therefore by me poking and prodding a little bit, maybe all I'm going to do is just anger them and make them think I'm a jerk.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I've encountered that very often in my personal life with people, and I kind of find myself doing that sort of mental calculus a lot. Usually I err on the side of leaving them alone, unless I perceive them to be in a, like, it's somebody that I care about deeply, and I perceive themselves to be really self-sabotaging or harming themselves as a result of their own belief systems. Then I'll try to sort of gently guide. I'm much more
Mm-hmm.
gentle about it than I used to be. I used to piss a lot of people off, and how blunt I would be and direct I would be in poking and prodding. And most of the time, I kind of
leave people as they are unless they invite me to give advice. But anyway, I think that applies on a broader scale as you described here. My personal belief is that you have to have a set of values that guides, like a set of heuristics that guide how you behave when it comes to questions like that. Like, should I leave this person's placebo effect intact, even when I think that their way of understanding things is inaccurate? Or should I poke and prod, which may be uncomfortable initially, but ultimately arrives us to a better place? My personal feeling is that truth needs to be the highest goal, and that we need to work together to arrive at something that's closer to what we might call truth, for lack of a better word, understanding the imperfectness of that. But I think that has to be the highest goal. I don't think it's ever really, or rarely is it a good idea to leave someone's bad, for lack of a better word, inaccurate or untruthful belief systems intact that maybe give them a nice feeling, make them comfortable, but are ultimately like are further away from sort of objective reality. I think truth has to be the highest goal that we value, and moving towards that has to be the highest objective. But there needs to be a mutual agreement about that, right? Like both people need to agree that that is the highest goal. If one person's like, no, I don't want you to take me there. I like my beliefs as they are. Like, leave me alone. Well, then, you can't really engage in that dynamic. But
I'm with you on the personal relationship. Like, I remember at one point coming home from Hawaii and being so bought in, to the raw food thing that I was into at the time. And my parents being like, leave us alone. Leave us alone. We're in our 50s. We're from Kentucky. We're going to eat fried chicken and,
we
whatever
don't
else.
Eat raw liver.
We're like not interested in your gross raw liver smoothie. This is not going to happen. I mean, in clinical practice, we used to have a joke, like the woman I share an office with, it's like, people are going to pay you if they want your opinion, and I kind of think the same, like, people can listen to the podcast or not, or engage with who they want to engage with. But I do think still I'm on the track of putting it out there in a way that hopefully is balanced and entertaining in some way, will draw people to maybe ask these questions. And I think it just starts with that. Like, if we go on social media, like right now, I've been researching, this one product, and I like see all these ads, and I'm like, this is not in line with what I'm seeing in the research literature. It's like, I just want people maybe to like have a moment where they're like, really? Is this really the answer to my rosacea? Or, is this gut test like the thing that I need that also like happens to cost $800 or whatever it is? It's like, that's kind of what we're trying to do, is simplify it in the podcast so people can come and be like, oh, okay, there is an episode on this. We know at least these two people are trying to do their due diligence, and they are upfront about where they stand, which is, why I feel like it's really important that we say, here is our bias when we get started. And we can at least walk away with a little bit more of a balanced viewpoint to make a personal decision. It's just another point of information that isn't driven by our need to make a lot of money off of it. I hope people start to question it a little bit more.
Yeah, this is a bit tangential, but it's relevant to some lines of some threads of what we're talking about here. I remember, I've been studying health science since I was a kid, since I was like 12 or 13. This has been my passion and my obsession. And like you, I never did lots of raw animal foods, but I did a lot of extreme diets and a lot of stupid stuff.
You were a bodybuilder, right?
Yeah. So, I was an athlete and aspiring bodybuilder from the time I was a young teenager. My older brother was a personal trainer and a bodybuilder at that time. Huh? Yeah. What was that?
That's pretty, like, bodybuilders have to eat a pretty extreme diet. I mean, that's...
Bodybuilders are the original biohackers. So, before biohacking was a term, bodybuilders were doing it for a few decades, like Arnold Schwarzenegger's generation, Frank Zane, all those guys, they were the first guys like just shooting themselves up with all kinds of chemicals to see, what it would do, how fast they could build muscle and strength and lose fat. And, bodybuilders have been doing crazy stuff for decades. I'm fortunate I never went to that extreme of injecting myself with anything, but certainly did lots of stupid stuff. And I remember, given that I've been in this space for so long and studying different people with, advocating different diets and exercise approaches for many, many years, I would say the first, let's say 15, maybe 20 years of studying all that stuff, I would be sort of convinced of one thing after the next and commit deeply ideologically committed to one thing after the next and very, very identified with it. Right. So like having conversations with people, I was coming from a place of like, no, this really is the one right way of doing things. This is the best way. This is the true way. And engaging in conversations or arguments from that place is like this very stressful thing where it's like, no, I have to convince you that my way is right and you are wrong. And the other person's coming from that perspective. And it's really interesting to look back on that now, because now I come from a place where like, I'm not afraid to have an argument or debate about any of my health positions with anybody, because like my interest is arriving at truth. And if you are a knowledgeable, respectful person who has a lot of expertise and you're coming from a good place, like I'm happy to learn and alter my perspectives. Like if I'm wrong about something, I want to know, like I want to engage with you if you think I'm wrong about something, because I want to know if I'm wrong. I want to move closer to the truth. And it's just really interesting to think back on all the years of my life where that kind of conversation was so stressful to me, because it felt like it was a threat to my belief systems instead of an opportunity to arrive closer to the truth and the reality of the situation. And I feel like more and more people need to make that shift, where less identification with a particular health ideology and more just openness to explore what the best evidence says is true.
Yeah, absolutely, Ari. Oh my God, I almost got a vegan tattoo, dude. I mean, I like have some tattoos and I'm like, I may not make that choice now, but like if I had a vegan tattoo, I just can't even imagine. I totally hear that. And I also think like back to the conversations I would have with people, and it's like the brain gets really wily, or mine would, to be like, okay, well, that's the point that you're making, but like, what if we look at it from this perspective? It's like the need to prove like this is the right way. I'm totally with you. It's like to have the goal of like, okay, hey, I could totally be wrong. Like I've said this so many times, like in conversations with people where I'm like, me and Hannah both, like, we're just two people over here, like trying to explore this. We absolutely could be wrong. Sometimes we bring in like subject matter experts. Like, for instance, on the soy episode, we just emailed one of the authors of he has multiple publications, these studies that we were reading. He's just this very nice man that lives in Iowa. He's been studying soy like since God was a child. He came on the podcast, and it's like 50 years or something, of information on soy in this man's head. In his writing, you can see it. He's so balanced. He's like, maybe this, maybe that. We're still trying to figure this out. It just felt so good, to like approach a topic from that place. And like you're saying, with the end goal to be like, okay, truth and accuracy and like making it better for the people that are going to encounter this information, versus I have to like put my stake in the ground and like, there is no way around, the guidelines of this topic. My nervous system feels a lot better. It's like,
totally.
it's very relaxing, but I can also see from somebody who, I think like I have friends that have nothing to do with health. They're like lawyers or farmer reps or, whatever they're into. They're like raising their kids. They're trying to like hold it down in their job. They know they need to go to the gym or, whatever. They like have some like idea, but they don't have time to like go through all of this. And then it's like they get on social media at night or they Google something, and it's like they see something that is popular, or they like latch onto an idea that's popular and it feels good. it's like to take any steps in a direction toward, an ideology. It feels like, okay, I'm going in the right direction. It's like, I really understand that. So again, kind of back to the goal of our podcast is like to give people an outlet where it's like, hey, just listen to this podcast and see if this is the thing that you really want to go toward. Maybe it is,
Yeah.
but maybe there's a different way.
But it kind of gets back to what we were just talking about a minute ago about really having the value system of desiring to move towards truth above all.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily to find the one magic pill, but to understand, to have a more complex understanding of like the landscape of information, that there are many different lines of evidence which might disagree with one another. There might be controversy. There might be experts who think one way and experts who think another way. And it is a very complex information landscape. And if you understand that, like the goal is like, how do I navigate? How do I sense make? How do I navigate this very complex landscape so that I can arrive closer to the truth, right? And not get duped by the first person claiming to have the magic pill, which might be a very distorted and cherry-picked view that me as a non-expert in that particular area, that maybe I don't even have the expertise to be able to discern what is good information and what is not. Like, and so just having those sort of meta layers of awareness changes the goal of what you are pursuing. Are you looking for the first person who claims to have a compelling like fat loss diet? Or are you looking to actually understand the bigger picture of evidence in a more balanced and accurate way?
Yeah, I think if people understood that shift would lead to better fat loss
Exactly.
and to better skin or, whatever they wanted to accomplish, it might be easier to make that shift. And I don't think we realize that yet. It's like marketing is good. Sales are good. Ads are really good at pulling people in. And it's hard to convey that shift, in a 3-second reel, unfortunately.
Well,
but that is the case.
Go ahead. So there's another, I think exploring the psychological dynamics at play from the influencer perspective is also interesting, and which both you and I can speak to at this point. You're an influencer now. You have your own podcast. I hate the word
so
influencer. I don't like when people call me an influencer. I'm like, please don't describe me that word. Like as if I'm on social media trying to influence people. But the from the perspective of somebody who is, let's say, trying to promote themselves as a health expert and trying to build a business around it, trying to make money, there's these two, like almost two diverging paths that I would say exist. And probably it's more complex than this, but to simplify, one path is like somebody who's going to do what we were describing before, somebody who's going to say like, I've got this amazing magic diet. It's like, all you've got to do is get rid of all these bad foods, only eat XYZ foods. And it's the best diet ever. And it's just going to melt the fat away and blah, blah, blah. And then when you are sort of, it could either be done in a well-meaning way by somebody who just isn't that sophisticated scientifically or intellectually, like that they genuinely think that is the right path, or it could also be done by somebody who is knowingly trying to distort things to present a misleading perspective for the sake of making money. But regardless of that, it's like that's one path, is sort of here's this one right way of doing things that's cherry picked. And the other path that has emerged in recent years is to say, well, I'm the evidence-based person, right? I'm the person who, and this exists in a lot of areas. Like if you look in the fitness community, you have all these fitness influencers who are saying, well, I'm going to teach you I'm not like all those bodybuilding bros who are just telling you, the stuff that's been around for decades from the bodybuilders of the past. We now have science to show us the right way to build muscle, the truth about building
Right.
muscle. And so I'm the guy who's going to teach you what the actual scientific research says about building muscle. And it's all well and good. There's certainly a strong place for that. And I think ultimately it's mostly a good thing that I don't have too much criticism of. Though I will say there's a guy that I like, brief digression. There's Nasima, I forget his last name, but he just did a very nice video critiquing that model. Nasima, I forget his last name, but he's like a jujitsu fitness guy who produces some really interesting novel content. But the issue with that pathway is that now the information from lots of different experts who take that path becomes very homogenized, right? Everybody's sort of saying the same thing. And ultimately that becomes sort of like, well, you could probably get lots of the same information by just going into AI and plugging in, what is the latest scientific consensus on the right amounts of sets and reps to build muscle for biceps, or, how do I design my workout program, and what's optimal for hypertrophy, and how close to failure should my sets go, right? Like they're sort of, it becomes kind of generic and homogenized instead of each person's unique path. And there's the downside of that is it actively discourages people to think in novel ways, to be innovative, to be creative. Because to the extent that you're innovative and you're saying, hey, like for the last few years, I've been working on developing this totally new way of like working out, and it's really cool, and it has this, and this benefit. Well, then one of those evidence-based guys can come along and say, that's a bunch of pseudoscience. You don't know what you're talking about because there's no evidence to support all of your claims for all of that, which is true, right? But that's ultimately how science progresses, is like people innovating, and then ultimately the science catches up to people who are innovating. And sometimes people who are innovating turns out to be not so good, and it turns out to be ineffective, and sometimes it turns out to truly be a genuine innovation. So anyway, that's kind of this landscape of the influencer side of things that I see emerging. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think it's an interesting aspect of health science to keep in mind. Like I kind of hear you saying like people using research as a bludgeon versus like a helpful tool, I kind of see it in this way. And actually, before I got into like really being into science writing and like that, I wanted to be a medical philosopher, but there's like no money in medical philosophy. So I was like, okay, well, it'd be super fun to like pursue this. But my focus was really epistemology, like where information comes from. Because in my mind, I'm like, okay, you can say whatever you want, right? Like, I mean, I can come up with all kinds of crazy, cool, interesting, seemingly, correct, whatever. You can come up with anything and put it online and gain a following, right? But in my mind, I was like, okay, where does the information come from that we access? For me, this is what I came up with. It's actually the only paper I've ever published. I could send it to you if you want to put it in the show notes. But it's to break it up into, we can have personal experiences of our own that are beneficial to us, right? We can get information from tradition, right? We have all of this incredible evidence of how people lived for a long time that was very effective for them. Then people see things in their practices. There's anecdotal information from good clinicians. And then there's research, right? There's the science. In my mind, we kind of need to have all four. Like we need to tap into those different ways of getting information to have a balanced experience in this world. We can't just rely on one or the other. So I almost see it like instead of a white lie, it's like a black lie. It's like you're not leaving the information out when you're just like, this is evidence-based and it's the only way it is. It's sort of a black lie where it's like you're only relying on this one thing, but there's these other ways to have positive outcomes for people. And sometimes that is just their personal experience, or it is with a clinician. I mean, the whole beginning of evidence-based information, like you're saying, is we started seeing it in the field. That's a case study. People publish those for a reason. It's like case studies are a really, really important part of the evidence base that we have access to. Like when you go on PubMed, you could read case studies about all kinds of things. It's like how we understood that AIDS was happening, right? In the 1980s, is all these doctors were like, hey, this is what we're seeing on the West Coast. Is this what you guys are seeing on the East Coast? And they're like, yeah, okay. So we like have to put this together. That happens with all kinds of topics that, yeah, I do think people get stuck. Maybe detox is the most popular place where people get stuck with, like, you don't need to do a detox, your liver and your kidneys. If you have a liver and kidneys, that's enough. It's like,
Yeah.
you don't need to like help
Let's
that out,
let's actually
the acid base.
So let's
talk about that if you want to.
Yeah, that's a really good segue, because the next thing I wanted to go into is some specific topics. And both of the things that you just mentioned are actually great specific examples to discuss. The acid base, alkalines, diet sort of stuff, which I know you and I have talked a lot about, and then the detox thing. So maybe take the detox thing first, and like, let's dig in a little bit to some of the details there to help people understand, like, how maybe arguments on both sides, quote unquote, can be distorted.
Yeah. I mean, so we're going to do an episode on this in February. And Ari, I'm curious what you think too. It's like you've been around the block and seen a lot of things, but anecdotally, I remember getting detox kits, and I would get like the really nice ones with like the crushed herbs in the pills that they would like formulate for you, like when you ordered it. Or like I would do, he used to be Dr. Cayenne. Dr. Schultz would have the incurables detox. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that specific one, no.
They would send you, these like incredibly strong herbs and tinctures, and then you would have to take psyllium and juice apples, and carrots nonstop for days, and you just crap your brains out and do enemas, and like the whole thing. It's like, okay, there's a lot that would happen there, right? And I can
by the way,
still
really quick digression. I remember the first getting into this when I was a teenager. I was maybe 15 years old and stuff, and I sort of encountered the world of detox and and juicing. And so I like saved up money. I bought myself a juicer, and then I went to the grocery store and I bought all this stuff, and I juiced a bunch of like broccoli and cabbage and threw in a bunch of garlic cloves. I'm like, oh, garlic's, I read all this amazing stuff on garlic. So I put a bunch of garlic in it, and I got like, I drank like half of the cup, and I literally ran out to my to my driveway and vomited. And I was like, okay, maybe I got a little carried away on my first green juice. Maybe I need to pull it back just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's infectious too. This feeling of like, I'm gonna get clean. There's like a vibe of like, or at least there was for me, where I was like, oh gosh, I grew up eating like Cheerios and Captain Crunch and like Jiffy peanut butter and bunny bread, or like
you and me both. Like, don't forget, I can't believe it's not peanut. I can't believe it's not butter. Margarine was a health food.
And Crisco, I remember there was like, my grandmother was like, put it in your hair, it'll make your hair shiny. It's like, yeah, it totally will. Yeah, like actually, God bless my amazing mother. She's still to this day like, a pie crust is like not a pie crust without Crisco. So yeah, like having these inputs and thinking like, okay, I like know better now. I like got to get all this stuff out of me. This is going to be what helps me lose weight and not have cellulite and clear up my skin and like all of these, like achieve, like perfect, cellular health and beauty, whatever like these standards are. And so that's been the vibe. And I kind of still see that vibe around. I don't think it's as strong as it was like in the early 2000s. There was like a lot of strong like vibe like that.
Yeah.
So I can understand why there was kind of this backlash of people being like, hang on a second. There are actually biochemical processes that happen in your liver and in your kidneys and in your gut, and they detox you every day, and they like make it so that your blood is clean and like that your lymph is clean, and like that you have tonsils and a lymphatic system, whatever. So there's kind of these like two sides
Well,
that
so like just to be clear, like the evidence-based people, quote unquote, like basically came out with the argument, like basically came out attacking all the natural health alternative types that were involved in these detox things, basically saying like detoxification is a bunch of pseudoscience. Like there's
right.
no way you can detox your body. All of this stuff is nonsense. The science doesn't support it. Really, our bodies come, equipped with kidneys and a liver, and that does all the detoxification we need. Anything outside
Yeah.
of your kidneys and liver is
It's crap
is
and
BS, is pseudoscience.
yeah. 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 And I'm like, okay, it's interesting just as an aside. It's like if you like study art history or fashion or like any trend, it like goes up and down. It's like in art history, it's like the like Dutch, like plain paintings, and it's like they're on the farm and there's like very little color, and it's like Rococo and it's all like filigrees, and it's like humans
Mm-hmm.
do this, right? We like
Mm-hmm.
go like back and forth all the time. So it's like, yeah, of
Yeah.
course we do this in our health, right? So
Yeah.
that kind of is what happened, right? Like what you described. The reality is, and this is what we're going to try and present, there are ways to assist your body, right?
Yeah.
It's probably like the balanced logical, view that we would like kind of try to discuss is yes, thank God. Yes, we have a liver, we have kidneys, we have a colon, we have a microbiome that's incredible for detoxification. And there are ways to support those that in a nutrient based way, by the way, like nutrients are what fuels that entire process. Like when we talk about like detox pathways, those are biochemical reactions that are based on nutrients. I remember, I think it was Brian Walsh, Dr. Walsh taught
Mm-hmm.
biochemistry, and he was like, nutritional biochemistry it's like a double negative, or I might be saying this wrong. He's like, what's the right term for it? Like basically you don't need to say nutritional biochemistry. Like all biochemistry is nutritional.
It's redundant. It's
Redundant. Exactly.
why am I spacing on the name?
Well, that's the right
Yeah,
word. That's the word I was searching
basically
for.
it's superfluous to add biochemistry to it.
Yeah, the nutritional part. He's like, all biochemical reactions are based on nutrients. So like, why would we call it nutritional biochemistry? And that's the same for detoxification. So yeah, while people probably, well, more than probably, they did go overboard with the juicing and the psyllium and the enemas and the, this and that and the other thing, it is also true, and it is in the evidence, that nutrients support that process. So there's this middle ground where it's like, yeah, we can go too far on one side. We can also go too far on the other side. And there's this place in between where it's like we're exposed to stuff today. I mean, I live on one of the main streets in Midtown Boston. When we clean our windowsills, it is black, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like at night, we use an air filter. We put a shower filter on the shower because, there's lead. They're literally lead pipes. Our building was built like in the 1800s. Whatever is in the air, in our food, it's like we were never exposed to that,
Yeah,
before. And so there are ways to support that can be helpful to those organs. We don't
totally.
have to
Like if
just
you're living
rely on
in
those.
an unprecedented environment with
Right.
orders of magnitude more toxins and novel toxins that didn't exist in the ancestral environment when where your liver and kidneys evolved in, maybe it makes sense to try to
Give him a little
support some
help.
of that. And then to your point, like, yeah, okay, so the processes involved in detoxification in the liver, like nutrients serve as precursors to help facilitate those processes. So therefore what you eat influences detoxification via that pathway.
Big
It's
time.
also been shown that different
Yeah,
compounds can actually bind to certain toxins in the body and help excrete them.
totally.
And there's also a physical process of detoxification of like sweating is one of the main
Yeah.
pathways of detoxification. Does going into a sauna or exercising, doing things
Help.
that make you sweat more,
Yeah.
lead to more excretion of toxins? Yes, it does. Like the
Yeah.
evidence
Yeah.
clearly shows that it does. Like the idea that to talk of strategies to bolster detoxification is pseudoscience, and that is the quote unquote evidence-based perspective. is
Mhm.
itself nonsense, right? Is itself
Yeah.
going against the evidence. And so that's an interesting thing to explore, is like how much of what gets promoted as the quote unquote evidence-based perspective is itself pseudoscience. And right, this can lead to
Biased.
sort of,
Yeah.
there can be a game of one-upsmanship here, but like I'm not trying to play that game. I'm just trying to point out like how often it is actually the case that the people who think that they have the evidence-based perspective actually themselves are ignorant or uninformed or are missing a big piece of the overall scientific picture.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting to me. I mean, this is kind of like a little sample of like what we do on the podcast is this
Mhm.
exact thing, it's like yeah, I think ultimately what it boils down to is that we have bias as humans and we see the world through that bias. But if there is a time or a place, where we can step outside of that and be like, okay, like what is the opposing view or a different view from what I believe, or is there someone out there who can, kind of help me get closer to like how you're calling like the truth? That will be beneficial to help us accomplish our goals. If we
Mhm.
can put it in a format that's kind of fun and funny and, I can talk about like buying leeches off the internet and like all the crazy shit
Is
I've
that
done, it's
possible to
like,
do?
yeah. I
Oh,
mean,
gee.
okay, let me just say this.
For
Nobody
medical
should,
purposes or as pets or what?
dude, I don't know if you still can, but we've lived in Boston for 7 years. I had leeches in our apartment in Tahoe. The water in Squaw Valley in Tahoe, it's Palisades now, I think, is like pristine. It's like some of the cleanest water in the country. It's amazing. You just like take a shower and it's snow melt. So you
Uh-huh.
can keep leeches there really easily because they're very sensitive creatures. They have to
Oh,
live in
really?
clean water. Anyway, if you don't have that water, they just die. Like
Wow.
they're definitely canaries in the coal mine. So 8 years ago, 9 years ago, we were living up there, you could go online. I think it's like leeches.net, and you order this certain, species of medicinal leech and use them. I don't
Wow, it's
recommend that
actually for
anybody do
medicinal
that.
purposes. Leeches. I'm gonna see in real
Totally
time if this
pussy.
exists. Okay, leech is not leeches.net. Let's say leeches for sale.
Yeah, look and see what you can find. I think at the time that was the URL.
Leeches.com. Yeah.
Okay,
Leeches.
leeches.com.
Leeches. Yeah, there's lots
Um,
of people selling leeches apparently. News to me.
Yeah, it's a super interesting, to me, still a super interesting topic, just like to explore that it's
Mhm.
weird, it's novel. And then we pair that with like, okay, we're going to talk about soy. We're going to talk about the carnivore diet. We're going to talk
Mhm.
about keto, like things that aren't as gross to people. But I also think like there is this element of the conversation in health science. I think probably because it deals with our mortality, it feels really heavy. Um, and for me, at least, it's like a long time ago, I was like, we're gonna die. We're gonna die. That is just absolutely gonna happen. Hopefully, we die in like the most peaceful, functional way possible. But to like lessen that feeling a little bit, that burden on people, and to be like, hey, it doesn't have to be as serious. Like, you're gonna be trying these things out. Let's try and just like bring a little bit of lightness to this. That seems beneficial to me because like I said, I think for a lot of people this topic can get really heavy, especially when they get entrenched in like I have to eat this certain diet and like if I don't have the right food then it's like
Then I
this
might die
constant.
someday.
Yeah, totally, totally. It's sad. I think people lose like a lot of like beautiful moments in their life because
Mhm.
they're stressed out about this and it's like, hey, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. I remember
You're gonna
the
be
first.
fine. It's okay. You're gonna be fine. I mean, you're
You're gonna
not gonna be
die,
fine. You're
but
gonna die, but it's gonna be fine.
yeah. There was this class, like the first blood chemistry course I ever took was with Dr. Abbas Kutab, who I don't even know if he's teaching anymore, but he was this lovely, lovely man. And he was talking about detoxification and he was like, oh, one of the worst offending foods is strawberries. Like they're heavily sprayed, try to get
Mhm.
them organic or local. Like, and so he's like teaching, and then we're like in this ballroom at some hotel in like Reno or wherever. And we like go to lunch and on the salad is strawberries. And I remember just sitting at his table, like waiting, like is this guy gonna eat these strawberries? And he totally did. He was just like, this is life. Like you just have to like lessen up a little bit. It's a strawberry. It's
Yeah.
not a freaking, Big Mac or whatever.
Yeah.
So that is also a goal of this podcast, is to try and like help people let go just a little bit and have some enjoyment while we're here.
Yeah. And I mean, this broaches another topic, which we can either choose to go down or not. What one of the other psychological dynamics that you're getting at here is the nocebo effect, and
Mm-hmm.
the potential to learn. Let's give the benefit of the doubt, and to make the argument simpler, let's say perfectly legitimate and accurate facts about health, that, like the amount of pesticide residues on strawberries as a good example, or any number of other things, so and so protein powders or XYZ thing has some arsenic in it, or seafood has mercury in it, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And Wi-Fi could be harmful to your health, and so on. Like, to when you learn, like, one of the things that's been shocking, was really evident during the COVID era, is to realize how bad we humans are at understanding the magnitude of effect size. Like,
Yeah.
we are horrifically bad at understanding magnitude of effect sizes. And like our brain likes to understand things as like yes, no, either something harms me or doesn't harm me. And if something is like, if we're informed that something harms us or could harm us, our brain oftentimes starts to be like, well, geez, that's like really doing this enormous harm for me. Like I'm freaking out now because I have like Wi-Fi around me, or I've been eating strawberries for years and I had no idea that they have all these pesticide residues on them. And there is a risk. Two things. One is that the actual belief about it's the other side of the coin of what we were talking about earlier with the belief systems. But the belief that something is harmful will tend to actually make it more harmful to you in general. And there's also a potential here where, understanding the magnitude of effect size, maybe the actual objective effect of that harmful thing is actually very small in the grand scheme of things, but your psychological reaction to it, of being so stressed out and anxious about it, actually is quite harmful. And then, your knowledge of that thing, your fear and stress about that thing, actually starts to do more harm to you than the actual objective physiological effects of the thing itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Man, if I could like just give every person the gift who's been told like, don't eat gluten, I've like seen some influencers like gluten is like killing your brain and your neurological function. And it's like, one, there's just not much evidence to back that up for people who don't have like celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Like if you're really sensitive to gluten, like you're probably going to know, there's like a clear set of symptoms that happens. If I could just give them the gift of like, you could just eat this croissant and like, you're going to be okay. Like it's just to like relax their nervous system. That is a goal of what we're trying to do. It's like that absolutely I see as an important part of what holds people back. And honestly, I didn't believe that very much until I had a client. We worked together for probably a year, and she was the most compliant client I've ever worked with. We're still friends. Like my husband and I, and her husband were like still close. She had chronic fatigue for years. And some of it was connected to like thinking, the world was going to kill her. She went through a neural retraining program to kind of like basically work to teach her nervous system, like, hey, the world is not out to get you. It was the most incredible resolution of symptoms. Like she can go hiking now. She can teach yoga again. This woman was housebound for, I want to say like 8 years, and she would have done anything. She like literally was open to trying leeches with me, in my like guinea pigging state of like trying everything. So I do believe there's evidence that it's like what we see as harmful and what we believe is going to hurt us. for some people, maybe more than others, it does. It
Yes.
really does. And it has a physiological effect on us that sometimes we're not aware of until all of a sudden we're down to eating like 3 foods. We're exhausted. It's hard to put the pieces together. So
Mhm.
yeah, I hope that there can be some amount of like relief that this brings. Like, hey, maybe soy, for instance, you believe it's like this estrogen mimicker and it's killing you and you have to avoid it in every food. And it's like, okay, hang on a second. Like, is that the true story? Could there even be benefit? And maybe you think about that when you're, eating good quality soy and it is beneficial.
That
Um,
let me tell you a personal note on that. So like for years I was influenced by the soy is bad for you from following like a lot of the paleo line of thinking when I was a teenager.
yeah,
Some of the early paleo gurus, soy was being heavily demonized as like estrogenic. And, in the
yeah.
bodybuilding community, it was like, if you eat
Oh,
soy, you're going to
bad.
grow like man boobs and,
Yeah,
turn into a
totally.
woman and overnight with like 2 bites of soy. And,
Yeah.
um, and it's true, of course, that happened to me with the first 2 bites. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so, so I remember like encountering some health experts. I'm trying to remember who it was. I know William Lee, the cancer researcher, has talked about it
Mm,
heavily, where it's one of the best like anti-cancer, anti-angiogenic foods, and some of
yeah.
the compounds, genistein, and some of the other
Amazing
phytochemicals
isoflavones.
in
Yeah.
soy have very strong anti-cancer effects. And I started to look into the literature myself, and I was like, there's no real case for this food to be demonized. Like, it's clearly associated with lots and lots of health benefits, even
Yeah.
in studies on women who had breast cancer, where
Yeah.
soy is supposed to be a particularly, soy was thought to be estrogenic and therefore could potentially harm women with estrogen sensitive tumors. It actually, the evidence shows the opposite, that it's beneficial even
Yeah.
in that context.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is an awesome source of protein. Like,
Awesome.
and the research is clearly supporting health benefits. And I included it in my diet. And I remember when I first told my older brother about that, because he was still, influenced by all the paleo thinkers that had demonized it. He was like, all right, it's up to you if you want to grow
Good
man boobs,
luck, dude.
like, I'll wait, and I'll be over here in a few months when you grow boobs, and you can tell me what a horrible mistake that you've made.
That's
And yeah,
hilarious.
it's interesting to see those kinds of dynamics. But actually, soy is a sizable part of my diet now. I actually love eating tempeh in particular.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
only eat organic soy. I do
Hmm.
think that it's important in that
Awesome.
context.
I will tell
But
you from growing up on a conventional soy farm that
yeah,
yes, you
yeah,
should eat organic. Please try to get organic soy.
yeah, yeah. But that's an interesting one, right? Like, so many
Mhm.
people. I had a woman who bought one of my supplements years ago, and one particular ingredient in Energenesis, NT
Mhm.
factor, which is actually this amazing ingredient, super underrated ingredient that has a lot of really positive research on helping people with chronic fatigue, is a phospholipid extract derived from soy.
From soy. Yeah.
And she, like, when she saw on the in nutritional facts label, we have to say something um, like, for legal regulation reasons, it has to be listed like from, isolated
Where
from
it's
soy or
from.
something,
Yeah.
that ingredient. And she saw that and she freaked out, and she started like saying, like,
Yeah.
accusing me of all this stuff, like, you're putting soy fillers in there and soy has all these terrible harmful effects. I mean, she had such a violent aggressive reaction to the
Yeah.
idea that one single ingredient in the formula was isolated from soy, and that therefore her body was just going to be bombarded with all of these horrible compounds from soy. And I was
Yeah.
trying to explain to her, I'm like, actually, this is an ingredient that has an
Yeah.
enormous amount of research showing that it is hugely beneficial in your context, but you are
Yeah.
psychologically reacting to it as if I've tried to poison you. It's
Yeah.
like, it's really
Yeah.
interesting to observe just the reactions that people will have based on the belief their belief systems from the information that they get.
Yeah. They've been influenced. I mean, Yeah, to me, this kind of just feels full circle. It's like we have these different influences in our life. If I can be a source of influence that is positive, light, balanced, bias conscious, research based also, but like also like good horse sense, right? Like I grew up in Kentucky, right? I didn't grow up like with like a lot of like book smarts. It's like there is some amount of just like good like street smarts that comes in even to working with our own bodies that I
Hmm.
think people become divorced from, like your experience with green juice and puking in your driveway. It's like
Hmm.
that's probably not it.
Yeah.
So it might be better to go in a different direction. um but if we can be a voice of that, that's what we want to be. So yeah, that's what we're doing over there. Yeah, so I mean, essentially, Influence to Death is for people who they want to make balanced decisions based on balanced information about their health, let go of some of the dogma, get accurate solutions so that they can have better outcomes. And then also maybe like laugh a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
I imagine people listening to our podcast, like in the gym in the morning, and it's like enlivening for them versus like, oh my God, like I just have to get through this, like for my own good. Like if we were a food, we would just be like really delicious zucchini bread where it's like, yeah, there's a vegetable in there, but like there's some chocolate chips also. Um, so yeah, that's the goal is to bring up topics that have a lot of influence also. And we do try to stay topic based. Like our goal is not to go after people. That is part of our like
Ethos.
founding, points, is like we're not out here to like take people down. I think we're about to publish our 20th episode. There's maybe only like 2 or 3 episodes where we've specifically talked about, one influencer. We more just try to focus on topics and give people balanced source of
Hmm.
information. So yeah, if you're like kind of tired of the status quo, like ads, social media, memes, like making decisions based off of like very one-sided or, like quick and dirty info, check us out. And if
Yeah.
you want to find us, we're on Substack. So we're influencetodeath.substack.com.
And the podcast can be found on iTunes. And are you on
Yeah,
YouTube
it's
as well?
everywhere people get their podcasts. It's syndicated to, I think, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts. There's like many different podcast formats that Substack sends it out to. And then we're on Instagram also. So we're at Influence to Death on Instagram.
Are you on YouTube as well?
Yeah, it puts it on YouTube. So people can find it.
Skipping the syndication through Substack, and you need to directly upload the video on YouTube. You'll get a lot more viewers that way.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's a good tip. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing. It's like Hannah and I are both like research nerds and health nerds. We're getting used to being podcasters, so it's going to get better as we go and learn more.
Yeah. No, it's awesome already. And I think if I can give my own little pitch for why you guys should subscribe to Influence to Death, I think you heard both Victoria and me talk about sort of our own personal journeys of being sort of suckered into one extreme approach after another. And like, I think probably a lot of you guys listening have gone through similar experiences, maybe not to the extremes, but you've been sort of sucked into one particular approach to diet or to lifestyle or whatever, from one extreme approach from one particular influencer on how to do things after another, after another, after another. And you eventually now look back on some of those and realize that a lot of the information was inaccurate. A lot of it was ineffective. A lot of it was years of wasted time and energy and money. And,
Mm-hmm.
to the point of what we were saying earlier about, kind of the highest goal being arriving at truth. I think you really want, especially in an information age where there are so many different competing and contradictory claims, you really want to align yourself with as many clear thinkers as possible who can help you sense make, who can help you think through different lines of evidence, different claims, and what's good information and what's bad. And ultimately, that's going to translate into saving you years of wasted time, energy, and money. So,
Yeah.
that's a huge benefit in and of itself. And the other thing I think that's an important thread to circle back to is the nocebo effect. I think from my
Mm-hmm.
perspective, a big part of the benefit of the work that you do is helping people to lighten up, basically helping people to like let go of some of the extreme neuroticism and stress and anxiety that they may have about the harms of certain things. You know, that it's a
Mm-hmm.
balance, right? Like sometimes a lot of people need to move in the direction of doing things a lot better than what they're doing, but there's a certain subset of people that need to move in the direction of like just relaxing a bit and like
Yeah.
not taking
Yeah.
every little um, trip up, you know, from perfection as being so bad for their health, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding that their psychological reactions to those um, little things might actually be doing them more harm than the little things themselves. And so I think
Yeah.
your work is a really great way to help people psychologically sort of counterbalance those perfectionist orthorexic type tendencies.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, Influence to Death is where you want to go. Look up Influence to Death. Victoria, thank you so much for
Okay.
coming on the show, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Yeah. Same, Ari. Thank you so much.